something, and then it's like, yeah.
All right, welcome. You're watching Mirror Now. Faye D'Souza, thank you for joining us. We're doing a Verified today because I have a very interesting guest who's been kind enough to come into the studio. Now, Ruchir Sharma, you'll know him from the business channels because people are normally asking him advice about the economy, the GDP, and where to invest money. But Ruchir Sharma is also the best-selling author and with this brand new book. This is a book that basically chronicles his journeys across India as he started tracking elections 20 years ago. It's very insightful, it's very easy to read, and I recommend for if you're new to the entire election formula and you want to know where all of this started, this is a good way to bring yourself up to speed. Ruchir's been kind enough to come into the studio, and there couldn't have been a better time to have this conversation. Great book, Ruchir, congratulations. What I found really interesting is that there are a lot of things about this election and this campaign that people think are happening for the first time or are being done for the first time. For example, bringing in the whole nationalism, politicians saying really mean and uncool things to each other. But you know, the truth is that this is not happening for the first time. Politics in India has always been sort of in this range, hasn't it?
Yes, that's true in terms of it's a continuum, in terms of, but I do feel that this election, if I just sort of recount my 27 election trips have been recounted in the book compared to this one, is about the most polarized though I've seen at every level.
Okay. Polarized how though?
Polarized at a caste level, at a region level, at a regional level, and at a leader level. It's all together. Now, in the past, as you say, that it's not as if this happened for the first time.
Yes.
Elections in India have often been fought presidential. When the Gandhi family used to dominate the discourse,
yes,
then elections were fought, you know, in a very presidential format.
Yes.
Or they tried
so the Indira Gandhi format of
and even Rajiv Gandhi,
yes,
back in '89, and even when he was trying, you know, back in '91, he was trying that. It was very much around one leader. But what's also interesting is the fact that how the sort of roles reverse. As
yes,
I sort of documented, you know, towards the end of my book, which is that the slogans that the Congress and the opposition are using today are what the BJP and the other would use in the 80s and 90s. And the slogan that the BJP is using today for getting a strong government, Mazboot
yes,
Sarkar as they
yes,
call it,
yes,
and creating this fear that if you end up electing the opposition, that would be such a negative. That's exactly the kind of narrative that the Congress would use against the
back
opposition. Back even, I still
Soot
remember,
Boot Ki Sarkar, we never thought would be the Congress saying to the BJP, for example.
Yeah, but and also remember the '89 election. You know, this goes back, but this is the start of my political journey.
Yes.
In '89, one of the darkest advertising campaigns I had ever seen was when Rajiv Gandhi and his team used this very dark campaign to try and make it out to be that if the opposition comes to power, you know, you can turn the lights out in India. That's the kind of dark campaign which was run. So I guess that's what I've tried to do, to document that how
yes,
things have changed and not changed over the years, and how there are echoes with the past elections compared to the current election.
It's really interesting and an important way for us to figure out how we got to this point, because just looking at this election in isolation perhaps doesn't make sense. And you do sound, from what you're saying and also from the book, that you disagree with the idea that a Gathbandhan or a coalition government is specifically bad for us, because this is something that's being propagated. Even, you know, if we walk across the room to our colleagues at ET now, there is this idea that if it's a coalition government, that the markets will crash and fire and brimstone will rain upon us, and you know, everything will end. But do you agree with that idea?
There's no empirical evidence for us to back this up.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, because I sort of make the point, like in the book, that if you are a very diverse country, then coalitions are a natural byproduct of that. And this is true globally, from Canada to Italy, whatever if you look at it, countries which are very diverse, which are very
yes,
heterogeneous
yes,
in their makeup, coalition governments are a natural reality of that. And in fact, in India, when we've had a very centralized government, again going back to Indira Gandhi in the 1970s, that tears the social fabric of a country apart, because this country is more like a European Union, a collection of 29 states rather than a homogeneous entity like China or
yes,
some other country that we wanted to believe, even compared to democracy like America. So I think that to fear a coalition is completely wrong. Now, the second point I'll make is the market's reaction, which is what you reacted to. That as if this is going to be sort of
the end of everything.
Yeah, but now look at what happened in 2004. In 2004, we had this black swan election where nobody expected the BJP to win that election. And the BJP ended up nobody expected the opposition
Congress,
and the Congress to come, and the BJP ended up losing that election. In the first few days, there was panic in the markets. That's what people fear. But it also marked the start of the biggest bull market in India's history after that. The next 5 years were incredibly sort of, heady because of a global economic boom. So we here sitting in India tend to overemphasize the politics and the local factors and not see this in the larger context. And just one final point I'll make on this subject, talking about coalition governments, the dream budget, if you remember, what people refer to as one of the best budgets which was ever produced in India's history, was during a coalition government of 1997.
Yes.
And the big path-breaking reforms which took place in India in the early 1990s took place when the Narasimha Rao government felt very fragile. In fact, I remember in those couple of years, almost every week there'd be speculation as to when this government could fall because they just didn't have enough numbers and all sorts of acts were being done to keep their government together. So there is no real relationship, I find, between the nature of governments and how the markets and the economy behaves.
It's also important to remind people that even if the market reacts strongly, upwards or downwards, it normally sort of finds its level in a few days. It doesn't stay there forever, does it?
Very true. So we find that it's really a couple of weeks. And then after that, there are so many factors which determine how the market's doing. Even last week, for example, the market fell a lot.
Yes.
And sitting here, we love to speculate, this has happened because of the fact that, there's increased political uncertainty. But in fact, it's the trade war in terms of what's happening between US and China that was driving things as far as the market's concerned. So it's great fun following politics in India, but don't let that influence your investing decisions. I think those two need to be sort of kept separate.
Yes, absolutely. Especially if you're a long-term investor, then it's absolutely, you could place a small bet if you want to at this point, but it doesn't make sense to hedge your life savings on any of this, right?
Yes, that's correct.
You've also, you talked about the group of people that you travel with, and apparently you still travel with them. You'll also place some bets. It says so in the book. What are you betting on this time?
Okay, so...
Have you closed your bets? What are you betting on this time?
So I'll tell you what the tradition is, which is that every time a trip comes to an end on the final night, the 20 of us, this is a group of 20 of us that I put together nearly 2 decades ago, we sit down. And in a very competitive exercise, we sit there and sort of come up with our forecasts. And there's a big honor roll which is maintained at the end as to who wins the pot in terms of who's closest to getting the forecast correct. What I can say about the group quite proudly is the fact that of the 27 election trips we've been on 26 of those election trips, we've at least got the direction correct. So now what happened this time? We traveled to West Bengal and Uttar Pradesh to get a feel of what's happening in this election. And then we sat down on the final night in Varanasi and came up with our forecast, the group's forecast. The group's forecast, and I can speak about it here, is that the average was that the BJP alone would get about 215 seats or so. The Congress would get about 95 seats. That is what the group forecast was at the end of the election that we came up with. But now, here's the big health warning, the big caveat that I'll say. That these numbers in India are, I would discount them heavily for one reason, which is the fact that if the BJP's, let's say, vote swing is 1 or 2% more, then its seats could go up to 230, 250.
Yes.
If the BJP's vote swing is 1 or 2% less than what's anticipated, then it could go down to 200 or below. Now, how the election looks is so different compared to a BJP at 250 or plus and a BJP at 200 or under. So dramatically different. And you tell me that after traveling in India or traveling in this country, can you realistically detect that 1% swing which may happen left or right? It's impossible.
Also because I suppose, and it does come across in the book really well, that every part of India is different and votes differently. So your travels, for example, between Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan is very different from what Uttar Pradesh's considerations are when it goes to polls. So you can't really predict, I suppose, it changes from, say, in a 20, 30 kilometer distance, people are thinking differently, people are voting differently. But I want to understand from you, so obviously the question that everybody's asking is, will it be a Modi Sarkar?
Yeah.
Right? Because however the numbers come together, at the end, what will that result be? Now, I understand you believe that between 240 and 200 would be very different, would come up with a very different result. How so?
Yeah, because I think that, I mean, like the BJP knows this, that I think that, that if the betting market is correct today, which is predicting about 240 for the BJP alone, then along with its allies, it pretty much easily makes it past the halfway mark, right? I think that if the number falls closer to like 200, then it becomes like open sesame, that we don't know as to who's going to form the government then. Or, the BJP will still emerge as the single largest party, but then all sorts of negotiations will begin. There'll be people who will be demanding deputy prime ministership, all that sort of stuff, that jockeying will begin. But I'd say that the market consensus today is about 240, the Satta market. And 240 or so is basically an outright BJP victory.
Yes,
or close
it's smooth
to
sailing by that time with their allies all the way home. But is there an odds that the Sattabazi market would be that far off and it would be closer to 200?
Well, it's happened in the past, as I said, that, you know, like it's happened, and both arguments can be made here, that typically if you look at the exit polls or Satta Bazaar, they have typically underestimated the winner in the past. So that's the positive argument. Of course, the negative argument is that we are once again looking at a 2004 type of situation where it's a black swan event.
Yes.
I mean, the fact that there is this feeling that there may be a fear factor which could be sort of underlining some, which could be distorting some of these polls and all which are being done, that people are not that free to express their opinion the way they once used to be.
So basically, you're saying that when you and your group of, say, colleagues and journalist friends are going out and talking to people, they're not actually telling you what's really on their mind, but when they go into the booth and they vote, that's when they'll be truly honest.
Well, of course, they have to be truly honest there. But yeah, there could be a gap there, which is the fact that there could be a gap between the two. That is something which maybe, there's no evidence of, like, to back it up. But, like as I said, there's a central case scenario. What could go wrong is how we always think.
You perhaps are the best person to ask this question. And I must tell you, I'm struggling. I've been struggling with this question quite publicly on air since this election began. And you begin your book talking about how you grew up or you spent a lot of time in your ancestral village in Uttar Pradesh with your grandfather. And there was a very strong caste system present at that time. And then you take us through the entire journey of how Indian politics has evolved since then. Now, we have on this channel, because we're a channel that spends a lot of time on the ground with people, more than we do with politicians, we've chronicled the entire job crisis for the last year and a half. We've chronicled the farm crisis for a year and a half, where we've gone out to every big state in this country, into the villages and talked to farmers, and there's no doubt that there is a problem. Do you believe at the end of the day people will vote, or because the votes will depend on or be influenced by that distress in any way, or will people still go back into the booths and vote based on caste and religion as they have and done so in the past?
That's so interesting, because we went to Uttar Pradesh, as I mentioned to you. We spent nearly a week in Uttar Pradesh as part of our 20th election trip, and here's what I found when we were there, which is that we want to believe that we have moved, especially like in these urban places like Mumbai, we want to believe that we moved to a post-caste world, which is that we don't really sort of, want to think around caste lines. Instead, what I found in Uttar Pradesh was that the caste lines were not only hardened, but we had moved to a post-truth world. And what do I mean by a post-truth world? Which is this, that in Uttar Pradesh, when you go, if you ask any person what their view, let's say, on Modi is, or what their view on development is, that has he done any development work for the country, the entire answer is dictated by that person's caste on the same issue. So you ask an upper caste, you ask a Brahmin, you ask a Thakur, you ask a non-Yadav OBC, you ask a non-Jatav Dalit, and they all will sing praises of Modi. On the other hand, if you ask a Yadav, a Jatav, which is Mayawati's subcaste, or you ask a Muslim, and on the same issue, they will basically tell you on how nothing has happened in the state. So there is no objectivity anymore.
So which is what you call a post-truth.
Exactly, because I'm trying to say that people are picking the facts or cherry-picking the facts or in seeing the facts the way they want to, not based on what, for example, you ask them, like, are the toilets working? Have you got money for building the toilets? Have you benefited from any of the schemes, such as the
rural electrification?
Exactly, rural electrification. Getting the the gas cylinders and stuff. And there's no answer which is like objective. Because if you're a Modi supporter, you will say, yeah,
it's fantastic.
These great things have happened. if you're not a Modi supporter, you will say, but no, I haven't got the toilet, I haven't got the money for it, or if I've got the toilet, I don't have the water connection in terms of it. So there is no truth as such that in terms of, it's based entirely on caste, the entire answer.
No, but it's while that may be a caste divide in Uttar Pradesh, any of the big cities, any of the social circle that, the viewers of this channel perhaps would be in, there are those people who staunchly believe that Narendra Modi should be given a second term and we should have what they call continuity. And there are those who staunchly believe no. And it's a post-truth world because WhatsApp has provided everybody with enough arguments on both sides.
Yes.
So we could, you could actually have a non-stop, continuous argument with someone where you're throwing facts at each other, saying, no, but this proves he's good, and somebody else will say this proves not. And you're absolutely right. Every story now has two sides to it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how do
That's why I said that the polarization is incredible because we've spoken about the polarization, so it's about, as you've hinted to, at a caste level. We know there's a huge one happening at the religious level anyway.
Yes.
At a leader level also there's massive polarization that you either love Modi or you really don't like him, right? I mean, there's no sort of middle ground. Very few people who have a nuanced view.
Is it going to be a pro-Modi vote and an anti-Modi vote?
Yeah,
that's one of the,
in the Hindi heartland states. So that comes so the fourth level of polarization, which is regional. That if that people don't travel that much in the south.
Yes.
Even in my book, as I document that it took us only till 2006 since we made our first election trip to the south. And we haven't done enough of the south is what I feel. And the south, the narrative is very different. You go to Tamil Nadu, you go to Andhra Pradesh, and you literally people asking you, Modi who, Rahul Gandhi who? They don't care about national leaders.
So I'm from the south, and there's been, it could have been the doing of the regional parties. It could have been the way maybe the national government has functioned over the last 5 years. But the South feels alienated.
Yes.
So people feel that these sort of Hindi enforcing governments constantly telling us what to do and how to live and what language to, and the language has become a really big point. What language to speak, and it sort of galvanized a lot of support in the South against governments or leaders or rulers coming from the north, coming from Hindi, who talk to us in, and this has become, and if we, this has become a challenge for them campaigning as well, because every time the main BJP leaders or even the main Congress leaders have to go down to the south to campaign, they have to get someone to translate for them. The translator is not always...
Happens to us also, like on our trips, like we would, like to Tamil Nadu, as people know here that less than 5% of Tamilians speak Hindi or understand Hindi. So I think that's, so it's so true. That's why the BJP's expansion plan has not been able to sort of reach much beyond Karnataka.
You can't communicate.
Because there's almost like a negative reaction to it in terms of like too much Hindi speaking, and they use it. Stalin, when we met him, would always sort of complain to us about that the national highways, why they're putting on like Hindi signs, and there'd be like a revolt against that. So that's so true as far as the South is concerned. We just don't seem to sort of appreciate that, like in terms of what and there's one more angle to this, the tax sharing angle. That's becoming a big issue now.
Yes.
Which is the fact that, that why should the northern states get a greater share of the tax revenues just based on the population?
Yes.
Whereas we are the ones, sort of who have higher economic growth.
Who are contributing more. But is that, so sidetracking a little bit. Is there a logical answer to that? Because the North, by that definition, has more mouths to feed, and we have to feed all the mouths.
But the South feels resentful that, like we did more for population control.
More,
so it's not a value statement. I'm not making a judgment here in terms of which is better. But just the fact that in the South, there is a very different narrative in play. A very different narrative where the national parties, whether it's Tamil Nadu or Andhra Pradesh, in these two large states in the South, the national parties are held in disdain virtually.
And even in Karnataka, the BJP and the Congress have a presence there, but they have a presence from local leaders.
That's right.
It's not Rahul Gandhi or Narendra Modi that's playing a large role in Karnataka, but 130 seats of the South. Do you think the South will hold the card of bridging the gap for whoever does form government?
Well, as I said, it depends on the numbers, right? That if the BJP falls short, which is of this consensus number of 240 or so in the market, and it falls short, then the entire game shifts to the South virtually, because both what happens in Andhra Pradesh and in Telangana then will determine a lot. And then a very important player will also come to be Stalin and the DMK, because most sort of indications suggest that they're poised to do quite well.
Most of those of the 39 seats that will come out of Tamil Nadu.
Right. So absolutely. So that could be the beauty of this election too, which is the fact that the South finally gets its sort of say in terms of, they have in the past too, with the Vajpayee government sort of revolves so much around the support.
Jayalalitha had a large say in a lot of governments.
That's right. So I think that's why the sort of narrative that the coalition governments are bad for us, and I think, is a bit misplaced, just because of the heterogeneity of this country. You need coalition governments at times to represent everybody. And the fact that you've had such underrepresentation from the South is something which may be corrected if you do end up getting a coalition government which is even headed by the BJP.
Well, you've also talked about your various meetings with various politicians. And I do want to focus on your interactions with Narendra Modi and his team, and of course Rahul Gandhi and his team, because they're the main voices or considerations today. Mr. Modi wasn't always very, sort of open to having discussions with the people you were traveling with. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true, because I think that he's very sort of it's partly because there are people in a group who feel very strongly about what happened in Gujarat back in 2002. And we met him in 2007 in Rajkot. At the time he was campaigning to be re-elected as the chief minister. That's the meeting that you're referring to. And I guess there was a clash of ideology then, that he was trying to sort of say, I've done so much for development, let's talk about that. And he had, because the growth rate of Gujarat when he was the chief minister was 12% a year for that period. Whereas there were other people saying that, okay, fine, you've done so much for development, what about taking care of the marginalized community in your state? So we had that incredible clash. And I think that both Mr. Modi and Mr. Amit Shah haven't sort of forgiven a lot of the English media for the sort of campaign that they sort of had against what happened in Gujarat in 2002. And that comes up repeatedly in our meetings as far as both Mr. Modi and subsequently Mr. Amit Shah are concerned.
So there is some sort of, that relationship is sort of soured between them and the English media.
Yeah, in terms of, well, the English media is changing its sort of shape today.
Post-truth English media.
I'm talking about what the English media was back then, and how they still view a lot of the English liberal media. That's just how they view that.
Yes, they've just now termed them the Khan market gang. So
that's a new term.
that's a new term.
I know, like in 2014, it was prostitutes. Now it's like a new term.
Well, quite frankly, personally, as a journalist myself, I believe prostitutes is the most vile term that has ever been used, where you basically call someone a prostitute. I mean, there's nothing worse than that for journalists who are doing their jobs. There are good journalists and bad journalists.
But there's one big difference, I feel, because, like in the US too, also, we know that Mr. Trump, he also uses a lot of, vile terms, as you put it, as far as the media is concerned. But in private, Mr. Trump wants to quote a lot of the same people. He wants to get his interviews in the New York Times. He wants to he wants to try and change the narrative with CNN. And so it's a very different dynamic in private and a very different public facade. Here I find is the fact that it sort of extends to the private as well. That there's a lot of hostility which is there for a lot of this media, which comes through in some of the meetings that we have had, which I've documented in the book. That I find is the big difference between, let's say, Mr. Trump and the leaders out here.
Hopefully Trump is not something we're aspiring to in this country. But I do want to ask you about Rahul Gandhi as well. You did talk about your first couple of meetings with him, where you said he talked more than he listened. And he did seem completely, sort of green. And he took a fairly long time to mature. There's still conversation about whether or not he has matured. For a politician who's at about 50 at this point, he might be running out of, cooking time.
On our latest election trip, I like what the TMC MP, Mr. Dinesh Trivedi, had to say about Rahul Gandhi. He basically told us that Rahul Gandhi is not as dumb as people think, but he's not as smart as he thinks. So, that sort of captured, I think, what is the sentiment today as far as he's concerned. That I don't think that earlier image of, just the sort of dumb guy on the block, I think that has changed somewhat, but it's still not a positive sort of,
it's not a convincing.
Yeah, it's not a convincing.
So actually, for someone who's watched elections very closely, and you do also, but I love that about the book, you talk about what rallies are like, how the press sits in a different enclosure, how the people are sitting in the sun, and generally elections in India always happen in the summer.
Isn't that? Yeah,
it's just criminal. I mean, the weather in most parts of the country.
I know, and I feel for the politicians here, because even we like to criticize politicians a lot, but I've seen them campaign, including on a latest trip with Mamata Banerjee drenched in sweat, so many people who claim that they've turned from white to black, which, in a color-conscious country, that sort of is a big deal. Yeah, I mean, for people, this is really grueling in terms of why we have elections at this time is unfathomable to me.
Yes.
But it is really grueling, and I feel for the politicians
I looked that up, though. Apparently, the reason why we have elections in summer is because that is the only time in India where you have a whole month and a half of weather predictability across the country. Because the rest of the time, it's either raining.
Faye, because I mean,
that's the Election Commission's responsibility.
Yeah, but I mean, that's just not right, because as a document, our first election trip, in fact, that we went on as a group was in February of 1998, which was a full-scale campaign, and that was a pretty good sort of campaign that we got to see. In fact, India's elections early on in the 50s and 60s would almost always be held around the same time in late winter. So I think that this
idea of So I just want to come back to this, and you have talked about the mood and the approach of each politician. For example, you talk about how Sonia Gandhi comes out of her helicopter, how she walks up to the stage, what her interactions are like with other people, specifically with the Congress party. Do you see them having the kind of organization or thought process that maybe the BJP brings into Mr. Modi? So he's always been very deliberate in the way he dresses, the way he walks, the way he's photographed, the way the videos get released about him. Does the Congress, are they even thinking in that direction now, or have they not gotten there yet?
They're trying to catch up, but I think there's no match. As far as the organizational skills are concerned of these two parties, I think the Congress knows it very well, that there's no match for that. And so therefore, no matter what the outcome of this election, it seems like the gap between these two parties will still remain quite large. Like one of the most fascinating things I found on this election trip of ours was the incredible surge of the BJP in West Bengal. In fact, I don't think I've ever witnessed something like this before, which is the fact that how one party disintegrates so quickly and how another party fills in that gap so quickly, as we saw in West Bengal.
By disintegrate, you mean the left?
Exactly, like the left. But the BJP's rise there, the fact that we went there for the 2016 assembly election to West Bengal. The BJP, I think, clocked a vote share of only 10 or 11%.
Yes.
In this election, if, people are to be believed, who we spoke to, while in Bengal, the BJP's vote share in Bengal could cross more than 30%.
That's very interesting, because
huge.
West Bengal is also the third largest state in terms of the number of seats. So you think the BJP might be able to, and they will have a shortfall in some of the other sort of Hindi-speaking states. Will they be able to make up with Bengal or not enough?
Not make up, maybe, but I mean, the fact that in Bengal, a state where you thought that the BJP,
didn't exist at all.
Didn't exist, and 10-11% vote share, the fact that could cross 30%, where it begins to start converting into seats, I think that's such an incredible sort of achievement. So that's what I tell you about the organizational skill, that I can't imagine the Congress party doing something as dramatic as that in any state, also, like what the BJP has done in West Bengal.
Those of us who track this sort of thing know that this is not a 6-month job for the BJP, at least. They started years ago. They've had a team sitting out of West Bengal, Orissa, for example, the Northeast, the entire Look East program. They're constantly in election mode. So they're constantly in preparation mode. Perhaps something that other parties should also learn?
Yeah, this has been incredibly quick. And the opposite about the Congress party. Because I think that if the Congress party and the opposition were to really underperform in this election again, I think that a major factor for that may have been the late entry of Priyanka Gandhi in Uttar Pradesh.
Yes.
Because we were there in Uttar Pradesh on the ground. And what people told us was the fact that the Mahagathbandhan is working relatively well. But the one problem that may have happened there is that the entry of Priyanka Gandhi so late may, at the margin, have chipped away at some of the anti-BJP vote.
You've actually said that the BJP should send a thank you note to Priyanka Gandhi and maybe Manishankar Iyer at this point.
No, but I think more seriously about Priyanka Gandhi. Because,
she's splitting the vote, you think?
I mean, could be splitting, she splits a bit of the anti-BJP vote. Say in a very tight election, where the vote share of both these fronts is virtually identical, of the BJP and the Mahagathbandhan, 2 or 3% is all it takes to make a big difference for 20-30 seats. That's, one with the other.
So I also want to get into some of these big states at this point. And you did say that the Mayawati support or the Mahagathbandhan support right now is very strong.
Yes.
Initially, there were questions about whether or not the Yadavs and the Jadavs would be able to set aside their differences. And they've been sworn enemies for a really long time and actually come together and campaign for each other and fight like a team. But it does sound like they have managed to do that. Has the Congress's biggest mistake not been able to reach an understanding in Uttar Pradesh, in West Bengal, for example, in Delhi, for example, where they're trampling on the toes of their could-be allies.
Uttar Pradesh, I think, for someone like Priyanka Gandhi, who we have documented in the book to be one of the most effective campaigners the Congress party has, for her to enter so late into Uttar Pradesh, I think may have been a tactical mistake. She would have been much better if she wanted to really help the Congress party to have gone against the BJP head-to-head in states like Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan. She would be much better doing that. So I think that this could be one of the biggest tactical mistakes that the Congress party may have made, especially like regarding Uttar Pradesh. The other states, maybe not that much, but like Uttar Pradesh in particular, I think so. Maybe, of course, they blame Mayawati for it, but whatever, between the two of them, if the...
Do you think Priyanka Gandhi is more effective than her brother?
As a campaigner, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think so, from what we have seen. But she is constantly speaking about how her brother's the smarter one. So I don't know where that comes from, but she's constantly saying that to us. But in terms of just sheer interpersonal appeal that we have seen on the campaign trail, I think that Priyanka does manage to connect much better.
So if they were going to bring her in anyway, they should have done it earlier.
Yes.
And the mess that was created with whether or not she would contest from Varanasi, which was a story floated by the Congress to begin with. Priyanka Gandhi herself brought it up several times when she was in public gatherings.
Yeah, they were teasing.
They were teasing, and then they decided that no, she's not going to contest. Do you think that was a mistake as well?
Well, that's a small stuff, and I'm saying but the big picture stuff is this: that if she had to enter the campaign at this later stage, she would be much better advised going to states like Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, where the contest was tight in terms of the Congress was the BJP, and taking them head on rather than potentially splitting the anti-BJP vote.
You do talk about
UP
attending, campaigns of her grandmother.
As a child.
As a child at the beginning of your book.
My first campaign, at the age of 5, was when I saw her trying to make a re-election bid in 1979. Yes.
And a lot of people do believe that Priyanka Gandhi's popularity, and if you look at the visual on the screen right now, is because of how much she reminds people of her grandmother. Do you think that's true, or does she bring more to the table?
It's a part of that. As one of those mysteries of Indian
politics,
elections. Which is the fact that if you take polls to maybe not now, but at least for the last few decades, they would keep showing up Indira Gandhi as the most popular leader.
Yes.
When these polls would, of prime ministers, even though as an economic person, you would look at the track record and you would
ask some serious questions.
Exactly.
About it,
what exactly is that all about? But she had that emotional appeal. So yeah, sure about sort of resembling that. But Indian politics has changed today. Just going on the back of charisma. For example, even 20 years ago when we began the campaign, I remember that we talked that if Priyanka Gandhi comes to the fore, how she'll be able to sweep UP and stuff, and a lot of people actually seriously believed that. Today, it doesn't work that way. Charisma takes you that far. You need a lot more than that, rather than just a surname and charisma.
We talked about the South, but Mayawati, Akhilesh Yadav, Mamata Banerjee, Naveen Patnaik are also interesting, not exactly dark horses, but horses to consider, because they will all perhaps come into a play on the 23rd of the month with certain number of seats in the bag. Might any of them be possible allies for the BJP, in your opinion?
I think that the bigger potential allies, if the BJP needs them, are likely to be parties which are not in direct competition with them. So now for Naveen Patnaik, it's getting difficult because the BJP is rising as the main opposition party.
Within Orissa as well.
Exactly, within Orissa. I think for Mayawati too will be very difficult because she will be looking for the next election in terms of it. So it's really for the parties where the BJP is not a threat. Those are the parties which would be more natural allies, which would include Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Jagmohan.
Yes.
Exactly. And Tamil Nadu, they already have allies, but if there's any switch there, you can argue there. But I think that for...
that doesn't leave them with a lot, though. That's I mean, the current NDA plus KCR and Jagannath. But other than that, that the argument of how will you fight the next state election would be true for Mamata Banerjee, for Mayawati, for
Congress.
Well,
I think that for me is the real sort of,
tipping point.
I mean, the real takeaway of the book as well. That this is a story of many Indias.
Yes.
It's the rise of regionalism in India. Whereas we here in Delhi, Bombay, love to talk about this as a national vote, centered around national parties. BJP, Congress.
Right. But so because before we run out of time, and since I do have you in the studio, I must ask you this. There has been enough talk about, and I'm switching gears here, about an economic slowdown. Perhaps we haven't paid enough attention to it because of the elections and everything else that's going on. But if we actually stack up the evidence at this point, the latest auto numbers show a 20% drop in sales of auto across the board, from two-wheelers to sedans to tractors. There is considerable evidence of jobless or unemployment at this point. There are big questions being raised by the NSSO on our own GDP numbers and whether our GDP number is reliable. And as someone who personally spent 15 years in business news, that I find fairly disturbing. In your opinion, when you look at all of this evidence, is there enough evidence for you to suggest that there may be or there is an economic slowdown?
Unquestionably there is, in terms of like an economic slowdown. And the problem this time is that nobody has a good answer for it. That yes, the global economy is weak. And I've always been a big believer that what happens in the global economy impacts the Indian economy, and we don't appreciate that enough. But the fact that even things like consumption are slowing down, which used to be so bulletproof, I think is a really worrying indicator to me, and something when the new government comes,
we'll have to.
I mean, has to be like a priority in terms of what you're going to do with this in terms of slowdown. But the fact that there's a slowdown on, whether it's because of a liquidity squeeze that people are speaking about, or there's something more sort of endemic which is happening, I think that this is a real issue. And that's why my point is that after the election's over, very quickly the focus is going to shift to the economy, to the slowdown.
It's also true that there is a considerable amount of money being pumped into the economy right now by the elections, because political parties are spending, whether above the board or under the table, they're spending. And when that is done, that steroid will get withdrawn, and then will we then see a very sharp, perhaps, dip in the money circulating and the consumption and the buoyancy in our market?
Well, I think we're already seeing that. So if you're talking about a further leg down, that's a scary bit.
But which is why I'm asking
this. The counter is the fact that when a new government comes to power, it's going to sort of try and sort of boost sentiment and the capex cycle by sort of focusing on what do we do to get investment going again. But and since you brought this up, back to the election, let me leave you with one really interesting statistic here, which is what I think that the viewers, should also be startled by, but something which sort of at least startled me. That the spend in this Indian election is going to be greater than what was spent in the US election in 2016. So in the 2016 US election, and then the estimates are official, basically said that the spend was about $6.5 billion for the 2016 presidential and congressional elections held where Trump got elected in 2016. Most private estimates that I've seen, because in India it's harder to document this because, as you said, so much happens underground. Most estimates suggest that for this election in India, the spending could be as much as $8 billion. So the fact that an economy which is 1/10 the size of America
is spending
and an economy where the per capita income is 1/25th that of America, is spending more on its election than America, to me is a staggering statistic.
This is staggering for two reasons. One is to ask where the money is coming from. Because obviously, and America also does it, you have the super PACs, which are corporates who give money to politicians to win elections, but people know where that money has come from.
$6.5 billion number is roughly what it is. That's
so you know who's funded this politician, which means you know whose favors he's going to want to return when he comes to power. We don't know where this money has come from, and that's perhaps very scary. Now I'm going to ask you, in a situation where $8 billion have been spent over a period of say 3 to 4 months, and consumption is low. We've had HUL say they're not recession proof. Dabur, Godrej, a lot of these companies are talking about how basic consumption has come down. Now, is that scary?
Yeah, it's scary, but as I said, the only upside I hope is the fact that something is done to improve the investment environment, because that's the one which was already depressed. The fact that if the new government comes to power and something is done to improve the investment environment is my hope. But I am concerned by the economic situation. I'm also concerned by the creeping competitive populism, as I've put it, which is that no matter which party it is, that everyone wants to spend more.
Yes.
to basically, in the name of helping people.
Yes.
Whereas those welfare schemes just don't seem to help.
Yes,
beyond
because
a point.
we've done so many of
We've
them.
done so many, like in the book.
So
like,
Nyay, for example, and you've mentioned that in the book.
Yeah.
Do you see that as a good idea? There were enough economists who sort of put out this idea of minimum basic income.
Where is the money for all this is my entire issue. And you know, this is why we'll never be a China. That we'll keep spending.
You do romanticize China a little bit.
No, I don't romanticize China at all. In fact, I say the fact that we can't be China because it's a very homogeneous country. But I also remind people that what China did for infrastructure spending compared to welfare spending at this stage of the development was so dramatically different than what India is doing. So that is something which I do speak about, from a historical snapshot. But we can't change that. What I'm still hoping is that we get our priorities correct. Like going back to the elections, we went to Uttar Pradesh. And one a real big issue in Uttar Pradesh, as you well know, is the cow menace.
Yes.
The fact that following the ban on cow slaughter, you have these thousands of cows which are astray, like damaging crops.
Hurting people.
Hurting people and causing all sorts of social tensions as well. And apart from that, also the fact that, like lots of people like we met in some of these places we went to in Barabanki, Mohanlalganj, they're telling us that they have to, there's much more risk at home now because the men have to sleep on the fields to try and protect the fields. So like the homes are more open to burglary. That's what some of the women were telling us. It's really disturbed the ecosystem. But here's what happens. No party is willing to sort of now touch this issue.
Cow.
Well,
Yes.
It's become a holy cow issue, right? So no party is willing to touch that.
touch it.
And instead they're spending more and more and promising to spend more and more on building cow sheds to help the cows. So is that going to be a development priority basically? That there's only that much money we have. I'm all for giving people as much money as we can, but there's only that much we have.
Do you believe we should be taxing our rich more?
I think we already tax our rich quite a bit. Our tax rates are quite high in terms of... No,
but technically someone who's making, say, 40 lakh rupees a year is paying about the same tax as someone who has 600 crore rupees.
But we've tried this in the past in terms of what happens.
Yes.
And we've seen what the results are. We've had very prohibitive taxes in the past. Now, do we really want to turn the clock back so much in terms of what happens? Yeah, we can debate whether India should have a wealth tax or like inheritance tax and all that. That's fine. But should we really be turning the clock back so much where we start talking about this again, or we sort of focus how do we release more money to spend on infrastructure? I think that is the big debate. So that's my sort of thing that why we can't be the next China. But on the other hand, let's celebrate the fact, and this is what this book does, which is that this incredible election in India has taken place. Despite all the advantages the BJP enjoys from the incredible money power, from the incredible organizational power, the fact that we're still having a pretty competitive election, a pretty robust election, is, I think, something which needs to be celebrated and something which we should sort of love the fact that it is so vibrant, the innate democratic culture in this country.
All right. Ruchir, thank you so much for spending time with us. It's been a brilliant conversation. And I wish you a lot of luck for the next 30 elections that you're going to track, and a lot of luck with all of the investments as well.
Thanks, Faye. Enjoyed that. Thanks.